There is a quiet addiction that lives inside almost every human being. An addiction so socially rewarded that nobody calls it dangerous. The addiction to approval. From the moment we enter this world, we begin learning how to earn love. Not how to feel it, not how to trust it, how to earn it. A child quickly discovers that certain emotions bring closeness while others bring distance. Smile and people soften. Obey and people praise you. Achieve and people celebrate you. But cry too loudly, feel too deeply, speak too honestly, and suddenly love becomes uncertain. So the child adapts. That adaptation becomes a personality. And that personality becomes a prison. Many people spend their entire lives performing a version of themselves they created at 7 years old just to avoid rejection. They laugh when they are hurting. They apologize when they are innocent. They say yes while their soul is screaming no. They become experts at reading rooms and strangers to themselves. The tragedy is not that people reject us. The tragedy is that we reject ourselves before anyone else gets the chance. We abandon our truth to keep connection alive. We silence our needs to avoid disappointing others. We carry unbearable emotional weight because we fear being called selfish. And slowly and visibly we disappear. The world applauds people who sacrifice themselves without question. The exhausted mother, the endlessly available friend, the man who never complains, the person who keeps giving while breaking internally. But nobody asks the most important question. Who taught them their worth depended on suffering? Approval becomes dangerous when it replaces identity. When your value is measured by how needed you are, how liked you are, how useful you are, you no longer live freely. You live carefully. You become terrified of conflict because disagreement feels like abandonment. You become addicted to pleasing because pleasing once protected you from loneliness. People think people-pleasing is kindness. Often it is fear. Fear of being disliked, fear of being left, fear of no longer mattering. A person who constantly needs approval cannot hear their own inner voice anymore, because the noise of everyone else's expectations becomes louder than truth itself, and eventually exhaustion arrives. Not ordinary tiredness, soul exhaustion, the kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot fix, because the body is not merely tired from work, it is tired from carrying a false self every single day. There is a deep violence in pretending to be someone you are not in order to deserve love. The body feels that violence. Anxiety is often the body saying, I cannot hold this performance anymore. Depression is sometimes the soul collapsing under the weight of chronic self-abandonment. People ask, why do I feel empty when everyone likes me? Because being loved for who you pretend to be is one of the loneliest experiences on earth. You sit in crowded rooms feeling unseen because nobody is actual. I'm meeting you. They are meeting the mask, and the mask receives the applause while the real self starves quietly in the background. Human beings were never meant to live disconnected from themselves. Yet many people spend decades mastering external acceptance while internally feeling worthless. We chase validation like thirsty people drinking salt water. The more we consume, the thirstier we become. One compliment feels good for 10 minutes. One criticism hurts for 10 days. That is the prison of approval. Your emotional life is no longer yours. It belongs to whoever is reacting to you. A stranger's opinion can destroy your peace. One moment of rejection can erase years of achievement. One disappointed face can make you question your entire identity. This is not sensitivity. This is emotional captivity. And many people never realize how deeply trapped they are because society rewards the trap. The obedient employee gets promoted. The self-sacrificing partner gets admired. The agreeable person gets accepted. But acceptance is not freedom. If you must betray yourself to belong somewhere, the belonging costs too much. There comes a moment in life when the performance becomes unbearable, a moment when the soul can no longer tolerate living divided. You begin asking dangerous questions. What do I actually feel? What do I actually want? Who am I when nobody is approving of me? And for many people, silence answers back, because they have spent so long becoming who others needed that they no longer know themselves. That realization is painful, but it is also the beginning of truth. Healing begins the moment approval stops being more important than authenticity. Not because rejection no longer hurts, it does, but because losing yourself hurts more. There is profound freedom in disappointing people honestly instead of pleasing them dishonestly. The moment you stop negotiating your worth with the world, something inside you begins to breathe again. You stop over-explaining. You stop begging to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop shrinking your truth to make others comfortable, and suddenly your nervous system softens. because the body no longer has to maintain a performance every waking moment. Real confidence is not believing everyone will like you. Real confidence is surviving the fact that they may not. A mature human being understands something deeply uncomfortable. Approval is unstable. Human opinions change like weather. If your worth depends on applause, your peace will always remain temporary. Some people will misunderstand you no matter how pure your intentions are. Some people will reject you simply because your authenticity exposes the falseness they are protecting in themselves, and that is not your responsibility. You were never born to manage the emotional comfort of every person around you. You were born to be real. There is immense courage in becoming honest after a lifetime of performance, to say no without guilt, to rest without earning it, to speak truth without rehearsing how acceptable it sounds, to stop editing your humanity for consumption. Many people fear that if they stop pleasing others, they will end up alone. But the deeper fear should be this: what if you spend your whole life surrounded by people who only love the version of you that was suffering silently? The relationships built on self-betrayal cannot nourish the soul. They require constant acting, constant monitoring, constant emotional labor. Love that demands the death of your authenticity is not love. It is a transaction. The most powerful transformation happens when a person realizes they do not need to earn the right to exist. Not through perfection, not through productivity, not through sacrifice. Your worth is not a performance. And when that truth finally lands inside the body, something extraordinary happens. You stop chasing, you stop proving, you stop begging for scraps of validation from emotionally unavailable people. You begin choosing peace over applause. And for the first time in your life, you understand this. The real cost of constant approval was never exhaustion alone. It was the slow abandonment of your own soul. There is a difference between caring and caring. Most people never learn the difference. Caring is human. Caring everyone is self-destruction. Some people enter every room emotionally overprepared. They monitor faces, analyze tones, absorb tension, feel responsible for moods that were never theirs to fix. They become emotional caretakers before they even understand their own pain. This does not come from strength. It comes from survival. A child raised in emotional unpredictability learns very quickly that safety depends on hyper-awareness. The child studies every silence, every sigh, every shift in energy. They become experts at preventing conflict because conflict once felt dangerous. And so they grow into adults who confuse anxiety with love. They think loving someone means saving them from every discomfort. They think devotion means abandoning themselves. They think empathy means drowning alongside another person. But no human being can survive long while carrying the emotional weight of everyone around them. Overcaring slowly becomes a form of self-erasure. You begin neglecting your own exhaustion because somebody else needs you. You silence your resentment because you fear appearing selfish. You keep giving long after your spirit has begun starving. And the world often applauds you for it. People praise your loyalty while your nervous system collapses quietly. They call you strong because they cannot hear how tired your soul has become. The tragedy is that many overcaring people do not even realize they are suffering. Their suffering feels normal. They have spent their entire lives believing their value lies in usefulness. If they are not helping, fixing, rescuing, calming, supporting, sacrificing, they begin feeling invisible. So they overextend constantly, not because they are endlessly generous, but because somewhere deep inside they fear that without service they may not deserve love, and this creates a devastating cycle. The more they give, the more people expect. The more people expect, the more guilty they feel for needing rest. Eventually, even basic self-care starts feeling selfish. They become emotionally available to everyone except themselves. Overcaring often hides a desperate attempt to control pain. If I help enough, maybe nobody will leave. If I love hard enough, maybe nobody will reject me. If I fix everyone's suffering, maybe I can finally feel safe. But life does not reward emotional overfunctioning with peace. It rewards it with exhaustion. You cannot heal another human being by abandoning yourself. And yet millions of people try every single day. They enter relationships where they become therapists instead of partners. They remain in toxic situations because they feel responsible for broken people. They excuse disrespect because they can see the wounded child inside the person hurting them. Empathy becomes self-betrayal. And because they understand pain deeply, they tolerate things that slowly destroy them. Overcaring people often attract emotionally unavailable individuals because emotionally unavailable people are drawn toward those willing to overgive. One person endlessly needs, the other endlessly provides. And both call it love, but love without boundaries becomes suffering. A person who cannot say no eventually loses the ability to feel where they end and others begin. Their emotional world becomes overcrowded. Everyone's needs enter. Everyone's crises enter. Everyone's expectations enter. Meanwhile, their own inner voice grows weaker and weaker beneath the noise. The body always keeps score of this imbalance, chronic anxiety, emotional burnout, insomnia, resentment disguised as patience, sadness disguised as responsibility. The body whispers the truth long before the mind accepts it. You were never meant to carry this much. There is an invisible grief inside people who overcare, the grief of never feeling chosen without having to earn it. So they overperform emotionally. They become indispensable, always available, always understanding, always forgiving. But internally, many of them secretly ask one painful question: if I stop giving everything, will anybody still love me? That question reveals the wound beneath overcaring, because healthy love does not require self-destruction. A healthy relationship does not consume your nervous system. It does not require endless emotional labor just to maintain connection. Real love allows breathing room, truth, boundaries, rest. But many people were conditioned to believe love must hurt in order to be real. So peace feels unfamiliar. Chaos feels intimate. They become addicted to emotional intensity because intensity resembles the emotional environments that shape them. And slowly they lose connection with themselves. Overcaring steals presence from your life. You cannot enjoy a quiet moment because you are worried about somebody else. You cannot rest without guilt. You cannot even experience joy fully because part of your mind is always managing another person's emotional state. This is not compassion anymore. This is emotional imprisonment. There is a profound arrogance hidden inside chronic rescuing, though most people never recognize it. The belief that you are responsible for saving everyone. The belief that your suffering can prevent another person's growth. The belief that without your constant intervention, everything will collapse. But people do not heal because we carry them. People heal when they choose responsibility for their own lives. Sometimes helping too much delays another person's growth. Sometimes rescuing becomes enabling. Sometimes your constant sacrifice protects others from facing themselves. And meanwhile, you disappear. There comes a moment when the soul grows, tired of overfunctioning. A moment when your inner life begins demanding honesty. You begin realizing that your exhaustion is not noble. Your burnout is not proof of love. Your inability to rest is not strength. It is pain, and pain ignored long enough eventually becomes identity. Many people do not know who they are outside of caretaking because they have built their entire personality around being needed. Stillness terrifies them. Boundaries terrify them. Disappointing people terrifies them. Because overcaring trained them to believe that their existence depends on emotional usefulness. But healing begins when you understand something revolutionary. You are allowed to care without caring. You are allowed to love without rescuing. You are allowed to support others without abandoning yourself. That realization changes everything. You stop rushing to fix every broken person. You stop interrupting your own peace to manage everybody else's chaos. You stop treating your nervous system like a public resource. And for the first time, guilt arrives. Because unhealthy conditioning always makes boundaries feel cruel at first. You will feel selfish for resting, selfish for saying no, selfish for protecting your energy. But what feels selfish to an exhausted soul is often simply balance. There's nothing compassionate about destroying yourself for acceptance. You deserve relationships where your worth is not measured by how much pain you can tolerate. You deserve connection that does not require constant emotional sacrifice. And perhaps the hardest truth of all, some people will only love the version of you that overgives. The moment you create boundaries, they will call you distant. The moment you choose yourself, they will call you changed. And they will be right, because healing changes people. A person who finally understands their value no longer offers unlimited access to their spirit. They stop confusing suffering with love. They stop bleeding for relationships that never learn how to hold them gently. And slowly they begin returning to themselves, not as a rescuer, not as a martyr, not as somebody responsible for saving the world, just as a human being finally realizing that peace was never supposed to cost their entire soul. People think letting go means losing something. In truth, most of the time, letting go means finally stopping the loss of yourself. There are people who spend years holding on to relationships that have already ended emotionally, holding on to guilt that no longer belongs to them, holding on to identities they outgrew long ago, holding on to pain because pain became familiar. Human beings cling to suffering for one simple reason. What is familiar feels safer than what is free. Even misery can become a comfort zone when it has lived inside you long enough. So people hold on. They hold on to people who stopped loving them years ago, onto dreams that were built from wounded versions of themselves, onto resentment because resent them. And gives the illusion of control, onto the desperate hope that one more sacrifice, one more conversation, one more chance might finally change everything. But there comes a moment when the soul grows exhausted from carrying dead weight, a moment when life whispers a difficult truth. Not everything is meant to be saved. Some things are meant to be released. And yet many people confuse letting go with failure. They think walking away means weakness. They think detachment means coldness. They think releasing pain means invalidating what happened. But letting go is not pretending something never mattered. It mattered deeply. That is why it hurts. Letting go is not denial. It is acceptance. Acceptance that no amount of suffering can force another human being to become who you need them to be. Acceptance that some chapters end without closure. Acceptance that healing often begins where control finally ends. Most suffering does not come from pain itself. It comes from resistance to pain. The mind says this should not have happened. The heart says I cannot survive this. And so we fight reality endlessly. We replay conversations, rehearse different endings, imagine alternate timelines where people loved us correctly. Meanwhile, life continues moving forward while part of us remains emotionally frozen in the past. There is enormous suffering in refusing to release what no longer exists. People become haunted not only by what happened, but by who they became while trying to survive it. A woman stays in a relationship because she remembers who the person was in the beginning. A man destroys himself trying to earn love from someone emotionally unavailable because part of him still believes abandonment was his fault. Someone keeps proving themselves to parents who were incapable of seeing them decades ago. This is not love anymore. This is attachment to unresolved pain. And unresolved pain has a powerful way of disguising itself as loyalty. People often say, I cannot let go. But the deeper truth is usually this: I do not know who I will be without this pain. Because pain can become identity. The abandoned child becomes the anxious adult. The rejected person becomes addicted to proving their worth. The betrayed person builds walls so high that nobody can reach them anymore. The wound becomes the personality. So letting go feels terrifying because it threatens the very identity built around survival. If I release this anger, who am I? If I stop chasing this person, who am I? If I stop carrying this story, who am I? These are not small questions. These are questions of existence. And this is why true healing feels like death before it feels like freedom. Because something inside you must end. The version of you built entirely around survival cannot accompany you into peace. You cannot heal while clinging to the very patterns that protected your wounds. At some point, the nervous system becomes exhausted from hypervigilance, from overthinking, from ional bargaining, from constantly reopening old pain just to feel familiar emotions again. And eventually the body begins begging for release, not because you stop caring, but because carrying it is killing you. There is a profound misunderstanding in modern culture about detachment. Detachment is not becoming numb. It is becoming free. A numb person shuts down emotionally because feeling became unbearable. A free person still feels deeply but no longer allows feelings to become chains. That is the difference. Letting go does not mean your heart stops loving. It means your love stops destroying you. You stop begging people to choose you. You stop chasing explanations from those incapable of honesty. You stop reopening wounds, hoping this time the pain will finally become love. And slowly something remarkable happens. Your energy returns. For years, your spirit was trapped in emotional negotiations with the past, trying to fix what cannot be fixed, trying to rewrite what already has. Popped, trying to earn peace from people who could not offer it. The moment you release that struggle, life begins flowing back into you. You begin sleeping differently, breathing differently, thinking differently, not because the past disappeared, but because you stopped building your home inside it. Many people wait for closure before letting go, but closure is often a fantasy. Some people will never apologize. Some wounds will never make sense. Some endings will always feel incomplete. Healing anyway is one of the most courageous acts a human being can choose, because healing says, I will not allow what happened to become the rest of my life. That is power. There is deep grief in letting go. Not only grief for the person or experience itself, but grief for the future you imagined, the version of life you hoped would exist. People mourn possibilities as much as realities, and grief deserves respect. But grief becomes suffering when we refuse to let life continue moving through us. The river suffers when it tries to hold still. Human beings are the same. Life is movement. Everything changes. Everything ends. Everything transforms. Holding on permanently to anything is an argument against reality itself, and reality always wins. The deepest peace comes when you stop fighting what already is, when you stop demanding permanence from temporary things, when you stop expecting certainty from life, when you stop measuring your worth by who stayed and who left, because people leaving is not always rejection. Sometimes it is redirection. Sometimes life removes what no longer aligns with your growth long before your mind understands why. There are relationships you survive but never fully inhabit. There are environments your soul outgrows before your fear is ready to leave them. There are identities that once protected you but now suffocate you. Letting go is not losing yourself. It is uncovering yourself beneath everything you were never meant to carry forever. A healed person. Person understands something extraordinary. You can love people and still release them. You can cherish memories and still move forward. You can forgive without reopening the door to harm. You can feel grief and still choose life again. This is not weakness. This is emotional maturity, because maturity is not learning how to control life. It is learning how to stop resisting its impermanence. The strongest people are not those who cling endlessly. The strongest people are those willing to face emptiness long enough to discover who they are without distraction. And eventually, after all the fighting ends, after all the chasing collapses, after all the exhausting attempts to hold together what was already falling apart, a quiet truth finally arrives inside the body. Letting go was never about losing love. It was about finally making space to find yourself again.